I inherited the apartment from Helen. It was a cozy two-bedroom unit with a separate bathroom and soundproof walls, tucked away in a safe, quiet neighborhood. Everything I needed was nearby: supermarkets, a police station, and other essential amenities. The best part: no deposit required for the moment, and I could start paying rent once I was fully settled in. It was an incredible offer, and Helen's enthusiasm was so genuine that it brought a surprised laugh from me. "Are you sure you can offer it at such favorable terms?" I asked, feeling a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "Absolutely," she replied, her voice full of warmth. "I know you well enough to trust you'll take good care of it. Plus, I believe we should support each other in times like these. You're more than welcome to stay there." Her sincerity and kindness hit me like a wave, and I could hardly believe what she was offering. It wasn't just a place to live, it was the chance to rebuild my life. Helen's gesture was more than generous. It was an invitation to start fresh. I accepted her offer without hesitation. A few days later, after the doctors gave me the go-ahead, I left the hospital and moved straight into Helen's apartment. She had made all the arrangements over the phone. Everything was ready for me, a true testament to her caring nature. I didn't return to the home I once shared with my husband. That part of my life was over. The apartment Helen had provided was the new beginning I needed, and despite feeling a nagging guilt for not paying rent immediately, Helen insisted it was no problem at all. During my husband's working hours, I went back to our house to collect my belongings, but as I gathered my things, a sinking realization hit me: the house no longer felt like mine. It was as hollow as the emptiness in my chest. Helen's support didn't stop with the apartment. She connected me with a lawyer, someone she had trusted in the past. The lawyer's encouragement fueled my determination to pursue a divorce, and with each hospital visit confirming the health of my growing baby, I became more resolute. One day, as I was leaving the hospital, my heart nearly stopped when I saw my husband waiting for me outside. Panic surged through me, and though I tried to leave, my pregnant condition slowed me down. He approached me, his grip tight on my arm, and demanded to know why I was working with the lawyer and where I was living. I stood my ground, telling him that any communication about the divorce, compensation, or child support would go through my lawyer. When he demanded that I return to him, I refused. As he tried to force me back, a young woman stepped forward. She called herself Rebecca, and she knew my husband. Her protective stance immediately altered the course of the confrontation. Rebecca confronted George, standing firm and refusing to let him take me against my will. Her presence, along with her threat to call the police, shifted the power dynamic. My legs were weak with relief when George, hearing the mention of the authorities, quickly backed off and left. I breathed deeply, thankful for Rebecca's intervention. "Are you okay?" Rebecca asked gently, her concern evident. I apologized, explaining how relieved I was. Without hesitation, she called a taxi to make sure I got home safely. I felt bad for causing trouble, but Rebecca reassured me it was no trouble at all. As we spoke, I mentioned my address, and to my surprise, she revealed that she lived just below me. It was a happy coincidence that we were neighbors. Rebecca was new at my husband's workplace, having recently joined as a new employee. She had reported George's inappropriate behavior, which had led to his removal as her mentor. George had a reputation for being dismissive and cruel, especially towards women. Rebecca shared how George's behavior extended beyond the workplace and how she had witnessed firsthand the way he treated me. Hearing this, I felt a mix of anger and vindication. 3 weeks later, Rebecca and I had grown closer, often sharing meals and stories. She shared that George had been transferred to a subsidiary company after multiple complaints had come to light. But there was more. Rebecca was Helen's daughter, something I hadn't known until recently. Helen had managed multiple properties, including the very apartment I was staying in. George had once bragged about handling Helen's account, but after his behavior came to light, Helen had pushed for his transfer. Rebecca had been working independently to address the issues at work but had felt compelled to take action once she learned of my connection to her mother. Helen's influence had shifted George's professional world. With his income and status diminished, George's life had unraveled. As my divorce progressed, George reached out through my lawyer, expressing how hard things had become for him. He even apologized and begged me to return, but I stood firm in my decision to move on. Supported by Helen's steady guidance, the divorce was finalized, and George agreed to the terms of child support and damages. But then came the next challenge: my in-laws, particularly my father-in-law. His obsession with the baby being a boy became increasingly concerning. One day, as I was leaving my apartment, he grabbed my arm, demanding I hand over the baby once born. He insisted that the baby was the family heir, and despite my struggles to free myself, his grip was too strong. Just then, a familiar voice called out from behind me. It was Rebecca. She had mastered judo to protect herself and her mother from difficult situations, and she wasted no time in stepping in. With a swift move, she sent my father-in-law sprawling to the ground with a judo technique. Her confidence and strength were unmatched as she turned to confront him, chastising him for his interference in my life. As the sound of sirens grew louder, Rebecca revealed she had already called the police. My mother-in-law, who had been waiting nearby in the car, watched silently as the authorities arrived and took both her and my father-in-law away. The situation escalated, and my father-in-law was arrested. As the dust settled, my mother-in-law chose to divorce him. She moved back to the countryside, seeking a fresh start free from the chaos. George, however, tried to convince her to take him with her, claiming he was tired of his job and the legal battles, but she firmly rejected him. Through the lawyer, my mother-in-law sent her apologies, leaving behind some money as a gesture of goodwill. I was surprised by her attempt to make amends, but I accepted it, realizing it was likely her way of supporting my son's future. After the divorce was finalized, I gave birth to a healthy boy. My life, though still full of challenges, had begun to take shape in ways I hadn't imagined possible. My mother-in-law settled into her new life, while George's professional life continued to crumble, eventually leading to his resignation. Despite everything, the child support payments continued to arrive, handled by Helen and the lawyer. Rebecca flourished in her career, earning recognition and becoming a project leader. Helen's business ventures were thriving as well, especially her projects focused on women-only housing and properties for foreigners. As for me, once my son was old enough, I planned to return to work. Helen offered me a position at a new high-end cosmetics store she was opening. Her continued support, along with Rebecca's friendship, made me feel secure in the new chapter of my life. I was determined to be as strong and protective of my son as the incredible women who had helped me along the way. Their love and resilience had shown me that I, too, could overcome anything. In a single, harrowing moment, my world spiraled into chaos. My husband's voice, sharp and filled with an unforgiving tone, sliced through the phone, completely disregarding the gravity of the situation. "Why do you always collapse when I need you?" he snapped, as if my being rushed to the hospital, with our unborn child's life hanging in the balance, was an inconvenience to him. "We're here, hungry, waiting for your terrible cooking, and you're off relaxing in the hospital," he added, his words void of any trace of concern. My heart sank as he coldly declared that he had had enough of me, that he would be dining out with his parents, leaving me stranded to figure out how to get home on my own. His anger radiated through the phone, as if he blamed me for the very situation that was tearing at my soul. The fear for my baby intensified, the weight of his words crushing me further. There was once a time when I was full of confidence, thriving in my career as a cosmetic salesperson. My name was synonymous with success. I was proud of my achievements, from the countless awards to the respect I'd earned from my colleagues and clients. I loved my work, and it gave me a sense of purpose that extended far beyond the beauty products I sold. Then, everything changed. I met my husband, and what began as a whirlwind romance felt like a fairy tale. We married, and soon after, I found out I was pregnant. The joy was quickly overshadowed by a difficult decision. My doctors advised against continuing work due to the risks of a miscarriage, and I chose to step away, prioritizing our family's future. But as the months passed, I watched my husband's support for me wane, his excitement about becoming a father fading into frustration. Tasks that once felt manageable were now monumental, and every effort I made to meet his expectations was met with disappointment. "Where's my lunch?" he would demand, even though I had managed nothing more than simple sandwiches, his distaste for them cutting deeper than he could ever understand. His dismissive attitude towards my pregnancy, telling me, "Pregnancy is not an illness," made me feel isolated and weak. His patience ran thin, and my body, now a battleground of exhaustion and discomfort, seemed to infuriate him more than anything. Where had the man I fell in love with gone? I tried to rationalize it, telling myself that maybe he was just under pressure. He'd taken on a mentorship role at work, and it had been demanding. Perhaps this was why his once compassionate nature had turned to frustration. "Once the baby comes, things will settle down," I reassured myself, caressing my belly in a quiet moment of hope. "It's going to be okay." But deep down, I feared that this strain would only worsen. To make matters worse, my in-laws had begun to drop by unannounced. Their visits were never short of criticism, from questioning the cleanliness of our home to expressing concerns about how we would manage once the baby arrived. Despite their constant disapproval, they expected me to cater to them. I found myself scrambling to put together something to eat, only to be met with disappointment. I couldn't seem to win. My husband, instead of standing up for me, sided with them, leaving me feeling even more isolated. I tried, but nothing was ever enough. In their eyes, I was failing. One afternoon, heavily pregnant and already drained, I was sent to buy groceries. The strain was too much, and I collapsed on my way back. I woke up in the hospital, the doctors telling me I'd passed out from overexertion. Thankfully, the baby was fine, but I was told to rest for a few days. I checked my phone and saw missed calls from my husband. A faint sense of relief washed over me, thinking perhaps he'd been worried, but when I finally called him back, the anger in his voice shattered whatever hope I had left. "Where have you been?" His tone was unforgiving, as if I had chosen to collapse, as if I had done this on purpose. "I'm sorry, I collapsed at the grocery store and had to be rushed to the hospital," I said, my voice trembling. "They put me on 4 fluids and advised me to stay here for a few days, but instead of the relief I had hoped for, his response was cold. "You collapsed, and I'm supposed to care? Why don't you answer when I call you? You're so slow." His words were sharp, like knives. "Please stop yelling. It's not good for the baby," I pleaded, but he didn't care. "We're here starving, waiting on your terrible cooking, and you're just taking it easy in the hospital." The lack of empathy was suffocating. He wanted to dine out with his parents, leaving me to fend for myself. Even in my condition, the thought of exposing my unborn child to this toxicity made my stomach churn. I ended the call, feeling a wave of isolation crash over me, as tears ran down my face uncontrollably. And then, in the midst of this heartache, a voice I had not heard in years broke through the fog of despair. "Are you okay?" I looked up, and there she was, Helen, a former customer who had become a friend during my time as a cosmetic salesperson. Relief flooded over me at the sight of her, a warm comfort in the midst of my cold, lonely reality. "Helen, is it really you?" I whispered, overcome with emotion. "I can't believe you're here." Helen had been more than just a customer to me. After a difficult divorce, she had lost her sense of self-worth. I had helped her rediscover her confidence, not just through makeup, but through a kind of emotional healing. She had been a woman so broken, she had stopped wearing makeup altogether. But when I reached out to her with kindness, something inside her began to shift. Over time, we became friends, and I'd always wondered what had happened to her after she suddenly stopped coming by 5 years ago. Now, fate had brought her back into my life at exactly the moment I needed a friend the most. "I had no idea where you went," Helen admitted, her voice tinged with surprise. "I came back hoping to reconnect, but when I found out you had left, I was so disappointed." She explained that she had been managing a business overseas and had only recently returned. "It's been such a busy few years, but after things settled down, I decided to visit. Funny enough, I was just about to reconnect with you when I ended up here myself," she added with a soft laugh. "I'm dealing with a bit of appendicitis, but it's in the early stages, so nothing to worry about. In a way, I'm relieved it happened here. If it had been overseas, the treatment would have been so expensive." Her laughter, her familiar optimism, was a balm for my wounded soul. As we reminisced about the old days, her presence brought a lightness I hadn't felt in so long. And then, with her ever-kind smile, she gently asked, "You don't have to tell me if you're not ready, but I couldn't help but notice you were upset earlier. What happened?" It was in that moment that I found the courage to open up. I shared everything, the strain with my husband, the stress from my in-laws, and my fears about bringing my child into such a toxic environment. "I don't know if I can do this on my own. With everything going on, I'm scared." Helen listened intently, her eyes filled with understanding, and then, without hesitation, she made an offer that would change everything. "I have an apartment that you could use. I manage a few properties as part of a project I developed." The generosity in her words gave me something I hadn't had in a long time: hope.